You don't explain yourself. You don't defend, joke, or try to ease the tension. And yet, you have full control. A paradox? No. It's one of the most brutal principles of the psychology of power. The one who speaks less controls more. At first glance, it may seem that the one who stays silent is losing. In a world that rewards expression, reactions, and emotions, silence is often seen as a lack of strength, as passivity. But philosophy has told us something different for centuries. From the Stoics, through Schopenhauer, to contemporary psychologists of influence, they all point to the same thing. True strength does not need confirmation. Silence exposes people. For most, it's unbearable, because in silence you hear yourself. In an argument, the one who screams is not right. It's the one who stays silent, who forces others to reveal themselves. Silence is a mirror, and most people are not ready for what they see in it. When someone attacks you, provokes you, insinuates, your natural reaction is to defend yourself. But at that moment, you've already lost, because you reacted. You handed them control over your behavior, and that's what they wanted. People don't seek the truth. They seek your reaction, your stumble, your outburst, your weak point. Silence is a shield they cannot pierce. Machiavelli wrote, "The prince does not need to be loved, he only needs to inspire respect. And respect does not arise from emotional reactions. It arises from distance, from indifference, from cold, almost inhuman consistency." Nietzsche would add, "A strong man does not need to prove his strength. It radiates from his silence. Power is not for those who want to be liked. It's for those who can be alone, and for those who do not need approval." A cold demeanor is not the absence of feelings. It's control over them. It's the choice not to react impulsively, not to be a puppet in the theater of other people's emotions. Being cold doesn't mean being bad. It means being unpredictable, and that scares people more than anger. Because how do you deal with someone who doesn't play your game? It's one of the most powerful weapons. You don't have to say anything. Their voices fill the space. They begin to explain, attack, and then doubt, because your silence forces them to confront themselves. Power is not about domination, but about others giving you control, because they cannot bear their own uncertainty. When someone provokes you, be silent. When someone expects your reaction, don't give it. When someone expects you to justify yourself, don't do it. Instead, look, observe, analyze. It's not about passivity. It's about active domination through passivity. You control the rhythm, and rhythm is a psychological weapon. You won't be liked for this. They'll call you cold, false, arrogant. They'll say there's something wrong with you, because the world cannot stand those who don't need to be understood. But they're the ones who always have the upper hand. Philosophical loneliness is not a punishment. It's a privilege for those who stopped playing other people's games. Ultimately, silence becomes your identity. You no longer play a role. You no longer wear a mask. You just are, present, observing, free. This is the highest degree, when you no longer need to defend yourself, because you know nothing threatens your essence. Not because you're better, but because you are independent. It's not about being silent out of fear. It's about choosing to be silent, because in this silence, there's more strength than 1,000 words could ever express. And maybe that's why the one who speaks the least rules everything. But let's be honest, this strategy of silence, this art of innocence, it doesn't fit the modern world full of noise. It's not about being polite, it's not about being nice, it's about surviving in a reality where every word you speak could be used against you, where every revelation of your intention will be dissected and used as a weapon. A silent person who knows their strength doesn't need the theater. They don't have to prove their point, because they know that true control is not about convincing everyone to agree with you, but about not needing anyone. You see, the world has taught you since childhood that you have to be good. You have to explain yourself. You have to clarify your emotions. You have to be transparent, empathetic, available. But the truth is, the more transparent you are, the more vulnerable you are. Masters of strategy, philosophers, rulers, and manipulators, they all had one thing in common. They knew how to hide their intentions. They knew how to stay silent when the world was screaming. They knew how to let others believe that they were stupid, naive, weak. And then when no one expected it, they struck. Not with words, not with shouting, but with a decision that couldn't be undone. Because here is the greatest secret of silence. It is not passive, it is active. It is not the lack of an answer, it is the most powerful answer. It is not avoiding conflict, it is domination without the shadow of emotion. It is not capitulation, it is the choice of the battlefield. In silence, something is born that the world cannot stand. The unknown. And it is the unknown that frightens people the most. When you don't react, when you don't explain yourself, when you don't justify, they begin to create their own stories, they begin to project their own fears onto you. And that's when you start to rule not through force but through shadow. Because every person who cannot read you starts to fear you. They begin to respect you, not because they understand you, but because they don't understand you. And in a world full of transparency, this one trait, mystery, becomes currency. And here we enter the ultimate paradox. The quieter you are, the louder they hear you. The less you justify yourself, the more your actions mean. The less you need to be innocent, the less they can hurt you. This doesn't mean you have to be cold. It doesn't mean you have to disappear. It means you have to stop letting others control your life, your emotions, your image, your narrative. Silence is your wall, your armor, your mask, and your sword. Because in the end, this world doesn't reward people who are solid as a rock. It rewards those who are like a mirror, reflecting everything, but showing nothing. You're not here to be understood. You're not here to gain approval. You're here to survive with dignity, with strength, with control. And sometimes to achieve that, you must disappear from the radar, not to hide, but to become someone who cannot be caught, cannot be judged, cannot be hurt. Because in the game of power, of psychological advantage, of domination in relationships and systems, the most powerful move is to remain silent when everyone expects your voice. But it's not just about power over others. The greatest revolution is power over yourself, because the world that provokes you is not your true enemy. Your true opponent sits quietly within you. It's the voice that wants to be understood, acknowledged, confirmed at any cost. This voice reacts impulsively, throws itself into words, just to avoid being ignored. Meanwhile, the strength of the true master lies in the fact that they know how to live unnoticed and not suffer for it. Because silence is a weapon, but also a test. Can you bear the fact that the world won't understand your intentions, that your reputation will be distorted, that people will say things about you that are not true and you won't do anything about it? This is not cowardice. This is discipline, the choice of what really matters and what only feeds the. In a world where everyone is shouting to be noticed, silence is like the calm before the storm, terrifying and dominating. Silence kills chaos. Silence creates authority. When you don't respond to provocations, you create tension. When you don't justify yourself, you make people get. When you don't react, you change the rules of the game. And suddenly they are your prisoners. Prisoners of their own assumptions, fears, and interpretations. And you are because true power is not control over others. It is the ability not to be controlled by your own reactions. Power is silence that doesn't ask for permission. It's presence that doesn't need to defend itself. It's peace that nothing can disturb. It's Machiavelli without blood. It's Nietzsche without fury. It's the Zen of the samurai who ends the fight with a single glance. And that's why power doesn't require proof. Because those who truly possess it don't have to demonstrate it. In a world of illusions and theatrical emotions, true strength is unsettlingly silent. Because the one who can truly remain silent doesn't need to win arguments, because they've already won with themselves. And yet, here's the irony. Those who are the most innocent inside often feel the greatest pressure to defend themselves. Because the more you care about the truth, the more it hurts when you're misunderstood. But it's precisely at this moment you must decide, do you want to be pure, or do you want to be free? Because innocence is a burden. It's the need for everyone to like you, for everyone to know that you have good intentions. It's the fight for reputation, which eats away at your soul, piece by piece. Freedom, on the other hand, is the willingness to be hated. It's the ability to look someone in the eye when they wrongly accuse you and say nothing. Silence is an act of domination, not because you're aggressive, but because you don't play their game. You don't explain yourself. You don't confess. You don't try to fix their perception of you, because you already know, and that's enough. This type of power, it's not physical strength, it's not status, it's not money, it's spiritual impenetrability. It's Machiavellianism in its purest form. It's not about winning the argument, but making sure it never even begins. When you remain silent, you become a mirror. Everyone sees their own demons in you, and that terrifies them more than anything you could say. That's why great leaders, philosophers, and even mystics always had that unbearable, irritating silence within them, because it robs people of control. Now ask yourself this question: are you ready not to be liked? Are you ready to be judged poorly even by those you love, for a higher purpose? If yes, that's when you become free. Not innocent, not pure, not nice, but free. In a world full of accusations, projections, and fear, the greatest act of courage is letting people be wrong about you and not trying to correct them. Because you don't have to be innocent to live in truth. You don't have to be liked to have peace. You don't have to be understood to know your worth. You just have to be. Close your eyes, take a breath, and let their noise pass you by. Because when you remain silent, they say more than they wanted, and you are beyond their reach. But the paradox is that the more a person tries to regain meaning through external impulses, relationships, success, entertainment, outward spirituality, the further they move from the source of what they are truly seeking. Because the emptiness we're talking about doesn't disappear by adding more stimuli. On the contrary, it expands when a person avoids silence, the confrontation with themselves, their own chaos, anger, regret, and the past they wish to erase. This emptiness is not just a lack of meaning, it's a space demanding the truth, and the truth in its rawness often frightens, because it shows us that most of the things we build, identities, narratives, value systems, were created to hide the fear lurking beneath. The fear of nothingness, of lack of meaning, of death, which invalidates everything we cling to. At this point, many people either stop and fall into cynicism or create a new myth. The myth that everything is a lesson, that the universe has a plan, that every suffering serves a purpose. This may help survive, but it doesn't necessarily lead to awakening. Sometimes you have to let everything collapse in order to reach the source. Because what happens when a person no longer runs from the emptiness, then they begin to listen to it. Not through the philosophy of success, not through affirmations, not through the next piece of advice on how to live, but through silence. By standing face to face with that inner abyss. And strangely, the deeper they dive into it, the more they begin to see that what they once considered emptiness was a space of possibility. Not a lack, but a source. Many philosophers wrote about this moment. Kierkegaard called it a leap of faith, not as a religious declaration but as an act of courage, accepting the absurd and at the same time responding to it by choosing an authentic life. Camus described it as rebellion against meaninglessness, a rebellion that does not lead to nihilism, but to a deep affirmation of existence despite everything. Nietzsche spoke of overcoming nihilism by creating one's own values, as the artist of one's life. And here we come to the essence. The person who has stopped expecting meaning from the outside begins to be its source. They begin to create, not in an artistic sense, although often that too, but in an existential sense. They create themselves, their principles, their meaning, and in this creation there is no longer a need for confirmation from others, no fear of loneliness, because loneliness is no longer a lack but a fullness, pure existence. This is not an easy path. It requires courage to abandon illusions, humility to admit one's ignorance, and perseverance to choose oneself day after day, not as the ego but as a being aware of their fate. That's why most people avoid it, because it's easier to live someone else's life than to create your own. It's easier to repeat quotes than to think for yourself. It's easier to identify with roles, worker, partner, patriot, spiritual guide, than to see that all of these are just masks, behind which hides the same fear. But if you endure this tension, if you don't run away, don't numb yourself, don't cover it up with the emptiness of entertainment, then something extraordinary may happen. You begin to hear yourself, not the self you built from memories, complexes, aspirations, and failures, but a deeper voice, a voice that doesn't speak in words, but in presence. And this voice doesn't provide answers, but it shows that you are the answer. You don't have to know who you are, where you're going, what's true, because it all changes. You just have to be present, breathe, and not run away. Because the greatest courage in times of chaos is not to know, but to feel. Not to search, but to be. Not to fight, but to accept. It is in this stance that something is born that cannot be described with words. A peace that is not an escape. A love that doesn't need an object. A presence that doesn't need to be spectacular. And then, emptiness disappears. Not because it was filled, but because it stopped being a problem. Yet in this silence, where a person no longer hears anything but the beating of their own heart and the crackling of emptiness, something begins to change. Not suddenly, not spectacularly, but slowly, like a plant growing from cracked earth. The question arises, what if everything I've considered misfortune so far was a form of birth? Because perhaps despair is not the end, but the beginning. Perhaps it is despair that purifies the mind of the illusions we couldn't voluntarily let go of. Illusions about who we are, what we need, and what it means to live well. Simone Weil wrote that suffering, true suffering, has something of grace, because it tears us from automatism, from the gears of social roles, from superficial desires we adopted from others, not understanding that they are foreign to our soul. And the person who suffers consciously, who does not escape into distractions but walks through the fire, becomes someone else, not necessarily stronger in the sense of the external world, but more true, authentic, as if they shed layers of skin that never really belonged to them. And then something else appears, something that cannot be read in books or heard in podcasts. Humility appears, not as weakness but as the awareness that we are part of something much larger than our ego, that life is not a project to be planned but a mystery to be lived. Humility towards pain, towards ignorance, towards the fact that we will never have full control, and that maybe in this lack of control lies freedom. Because the freedom Kierkegaard spoke of is not about the ability to choose everything, but about the courage to choose what is truly ours even if the path leads through loneliness, misunderstanding and doubt. A freedom that is not a slogan or a promise of success, but a deep inner gesture. Yes, I accept being who I am, with all the uncertainty that comes with it. The modern world offers us thousands of answers. Algorithms provide solutions before we even ask the question. But maybe true maturity begins when a person can endure silence, doesn't seek comfort, and starts asking questions that have no easy answer. How is it possible that I suffer yet I don't want to escape? Why does what hurts seem more real than anything else? Is there a meaning that is not given from above, but one that is created in the very act of going through meaninglessness? It's not about finding answers, but about not stopping the search. Because as Rilke wrote, live the questions now. Perhaps one day unnoticed, you will find yourself in the answer, and then you will understand that it wasn't the world that was empty. It was your eyes that weren't ready to see it yet. That's why philosophy is not a luxury for academics, but a spiritual necessity, because it teaches us to stand firm where everything in us wants to flee. It teaches us to ask, even when silence hurts, and it teaches us to see, not what is convenient, but what is true.